Well, welcome viewers to the channel. I'm Dr. JWAU. What is Ashura? You're seeing Ashura here in the streets of Melbourne. It's an Arabic word which literally means the 10th, referring to the 10th day of Muharram, which is the first month of the Islamic lunar calendar. It's one of the most historically significant days in Islam, but its meaning differs between Sunni and Shia Muslims because of different historical emphasis. Before Karbala. Now, Karbala was an event where there was, as far as I can understand it, an Islamic coup, where the Islamists turned and killed the Prophet's descendants. Before the events of Karbala, Ashura was already regarded as a significant day. According to Islamic tradition, Muhammad observed fasting on this day after arriving in Medina. Reports in the Hadith state that he associated the day with Moses and the Israelites' deliverance from Pharaoh. Now, isn't that interesting? He associated it with the Jewish prophet. So don't underestimate Muhammad's respect for the people of the book, because this has to do with Israel being set free from the pharaohs during the Exodus. So Muhammad had respect for the origins of the Jews. He encouraged Muslims to fast on that day and later recommended fasting on the 9th and 10th or 10th and 11th of Muharram to distinguish the practice. For many Sunni Muslims today, Ashura remains primarily a voluntary day of fasting, reflection and gratitude to Allah. Now let's go back to 680 CE, the turning point, Karbala. The meaning of Ashura changed profoundly after the Battle of Karbala. On the 10th Muharram, 61 AD, 10th of October, 680 CE, Husayn ibn Ali, the grandson of Muhammad, members of the Prophet's family, and a small group of companions were killed near Karbala by forces loyal to the Umayyad Caliph Yazid I during the second fitna, and this transformed Ashura into one of the most defining moments in Islamic history. Now, we've got to ask questions about this. If the Muslims were killing each other, which is what this represents, they killed the Prophet's descendants. That doesn't sound safe to me. If they killed the Prophet's descendants. So how disrespectful is that? You've got Islamists running around wanting to kill people because they drop the Quran or ask questions about Muhammad. You've got to understand that the Muslims killed Muhammad. The Islamist radicals killed Muhammad, I should say Muhammad's family and descendants. Husayn ibn Ali, the grandson of Muhammad, members of the Prophet's family and a small group of companions were killed near Karbala by forces loyal to Umayyad Caliph Yazid I during the second fitna. Now, how can Muslims trust Muslims then? Because the whole Islamic culture is built on betrayal, more or less. I just want to bring another image into this for a minute. It's a little bit more graphic, but I think it will give us a little bit more of an idea. Here's a picture of the Karbala and what happened to Muhammad's family. You can't underestimate the severity and the betrayal of this. And what I don't understand is the biggest trouble for Muslims is the Muslims. Now, why this matters? The Shia Muslims, Ashura commemorates the martyrdom of Husayn, his sacrifice for truth, resistance against perceived tyranny, and loyalty to the Prophet's family. Now, the Shia Muslims mustn't have had anything to do with the Muslims that murdered the Prophet's descendants. Many communities mark the day of mourning, ceremonies, recitations, possessions, and remembrance. For Sunni Muslims, Husayn's death is also widely regarded as a profound tragedy. Well, viewers, it wasn't a tragedy, it was a deliberate massacre. But Ashura is generally observed with less emphasis on ritual mourning and greater emphasis on fasting and remembrance. So one of these groups, one or the other of these groups, had to have been descendants from the people in Islam that massacred the Prophet's family. Now, this is the confusion and paradox of this so-called peaceful religion. To me, this coup in 680, where this group of Umayyad Caliph Yazid I, who murdered the descendants of Muhammad to make sure that they could run Islam from then on, is not a good sign. It's not a good sign for Islam. Because how do you know who's going to attack next? The events of Karbala permanently shaped Islamic political history. It intensified the Sunni-Shia divide, established Husayn as a symbol of moral resistance for many Muslims, but it doesn't sound like he had a chance. It sounds like he was raided and just slaughtered. It remains one of the most emotional, significant episodes in Islamic memory. Although Muslims differ over theology and interpretation, there is broad historical agreement that Husayn ibn Ali and many of his companions were killed at Karbala by forces serving the Umayyad state under Yazid. Now, the problem is they were all Muslims. Muslims fighting against Muslims. Ashura, the Karbala Massacre of the Prophet's family. Extended documentary outline. What is Ashura? What is Ashura? Ashura is the 10th day of Muharram, the first day of the Islamic lunar calendar, before Karbala. It was already observed as a significant day in Islamic tradition, including fasting. After 680 CE, Ashura became inseparably associated with the tragedy of Karbala. The political climate. Following the death of Muhammad in 632 CE, leadership of the Muslim community became a recurring source of political dispute. So this was a leadership coup. Decades later, the Umayyad dynasty established control over the expanding Islamic empire. Okay, so these people want to take over Islam itself. Before his death, Muwayyad I designated his son Yazid I as successor, introducing hereditary succession into the caliphate. Many accepted this succession, while others regarded it as a significant departure from earlier precedent. Husayn refuses allegiance. So the descendants of Muhammad did not want to have allegiance with these people. Husayn ibn Ali, the Prophet Muhammad's grandson through Fatima and Ali, refused to pledge allegiance to Yazid. His refusal represented both a political challenge and a profound moral and religious statement. His position carried exceptional symbolic weight because of his direct relationship to the Prophet. Number 4, the invitation from Kufa. Supporters in Kufa repeatedly invited Husayn to lead opposition against Yazid. Husayn sent his cousin Muslim ibn Aqil To determine whether support was genuine, initial reports suggested widespread backing, but there was always the risk of assassination. Number 5, the Umayyad response. Yazid appointed Ubayd Allah ibn Ziyad as governor of Kufa. The new administration rapidly restored control through arrests, intimidation, and suppression, basically terrorism. Muslim ibn Aqil was captured and executed. So now we've got an internal catastrophic coup taking place within Islam against the origins of Islam. Husayn was already traveling and had limited opportunity to receive reliable news, so there was great fear among the Prophet's descendants of a coup. Number 6, journey toward Karbala. Husayn continued with approximately 70 companions and family members, including women and children. His caravan was intercepted before reaching Kufa. Negotiations failed to produce a peaceful resolution, and the caravan was compelled to camp on the plain of Karbala. Number 7, isolation. Additional Umayyad forces surrounded Husayn's small group. Access to the Euphrates River was restricted. Days passed under severe shortages of water, and the humanitarian situation deteriorated for adults, children, and infants alike. So there you see torture and suffering under hostage situations. Now this is the coup that took place within Islam to finish off the descendants of the Prophet. Day 8, the day of Ashura. On the 10th Muharram 61 AH, 10th of October 680 CE, fighting began. Husayn's companions were killed in succession. They had no chance. Numerous members of the Prophet's family were murdered during the battle. Husayn himself was ultimately killed by forces serving the Umayyad state, and the battlefield marked the destruction of the Prophet's immediate household contingent rather than a conventional military victory. So it was to wipe out the lineage of the Prophet. Now, I don't know if these Muslims realize this or not, but they're actually celebrating a coup. So if these people believe in the lineage of Husayn, of the Prophet, then they can't equally believe in the lineage of the Umayyad forces. So where is their loyalty? Where's the loyalty supposed to be aimed in Islam? Could somebody tell me in the comments, somebody that knows what they're talking about? So the survivors. The surviving women and children were taken captive. They were transported first to Kufa and later to Damascus. And remember, Damascus was where Paul, the prophet, was confronted by the Messiah. Their testimony ensured that the events at Karbala became widely known throughout the Muslim world. The statement refers primarily to the testimony of the surviving members of the Husayn ibn Ali and Ali ibn Husayn Zayn Ali ibn Abidin, along with other women and children who survived the Battle of Karbala after Husayn ibn Ali and his companions were killed. The surviving family members were taken captive and marched first to Kufa and then to Damascus. Because they survived, they became eyewitnesses to the massacre. And note the word massacre. In other words, Muhammad's prophets, the prophet of Muhammad, his descendants were massacred. Now, what did they testify? The survivors. Their testimony consistently describes several key events. Husayn and his small band were surrounded by a vastly larger army. Access to the river Euphrates was cut off, leaving the camp without sufficient water for several days. Husayn repeatedly refused to give unconditional allegiance to Yazid I. Husayn's male companions and close relatives were killed one by one. Husayn himself was killed in battle and then beheaded. I'm sure the Prophet Muhammad would have appreciated that. The tents were looted and set on fire after the fighting, and the women and children were taken captive and publicly paraded. That's a great way to finish off the lineage of the Prophet. And these accounts became the foundation of later historical works and the annual remembrance of Ashura. Zainab's speeches. Amongst the most famous testimony are the speeches of Zainab. In Kufa, she rebuked the townspeople for failing to support Husayn despite previously inviting him. And this is the unloyalty of the Muslims in that area toward the Prophet himself and his descendants. According to later historical traditions, she condemned their betrayal and mourning as hypocritical. So that's not putting a good mark on Islam where it followed on from there, because it was a complete massacre of the Prophet's descendants, a betrayal of Islam and the Prophet's way, and a takeover and redirection of Islam itself. In Damascus, before Yazid's court, she declared that military victory did not represent God's approval because it was a coup. She accused the Umayyad leadership of disgracing itself by killing the Prophet's family, which it did, and asserted that Husayn's death would ultimately expose injustice rather than erase his legacy. Although versions of these speeches differ in wording across later historical sources, they occupy a central place in both Sunni and Shia historical traditions. Zayn al-Abidin's testimony. Husayn's surviving son, Zayn al-Abidin, had been seriously ill during the battle and therefore did not fight. His testimony emphasized the identity of those who were killed, the suffering endured by the Prophet's family, the captivity of survivors, and the injustice committed in Karbala. Now, this has to reflect on the mentality and the mindset of the Islamic people of that day. His later teachings help preserve the memory of the event for the next generation. Now, viewers, why their testimony mattered. Had none of the Prophet's family survived, much of what happened inside Husayn's camp would have depended entirely on reports from the victorious army, which would have been altered and probably deceptive. Instead, the survivors provided an independent eyewitness narrative describing the siege, the coup, the takeover, the deaths of Husayn and his companions, the treatment of the women and children, and the aftermath of the battle, which was rape, pillage, and plunder. Their accounts were transmitted through early Muslim historians and became a major source of later chronicles, including works by historians such as Muhammad ibn Jarir al-Tabari and Abu Miknaf, whose reports are extensively preserved by al-Tabari. It is worth noting that while the core facts of Karbala, the deaths, the captivity, and the identities of the principal figures are widely accepted across Muslim historical traditions, and some details of speeches and dialogue survive in multiple versions and are elevated differently by different historians. Karbala did not end as a conventional battle. It ended as a moral exposure. Husayn's companions were killed one by one until loyalty itself stood surrounded members of the Prophet's own family fell on the same ground where political power had mistaken suppression for victory. When Husayn himself was killed by forces serving the Umayyad state, the battlefield no longer represented military success. It represented the destruction of the Prophet's household contingent inside the very civilization that claimed inheritance from him. But Karbala did not remain buried in the sand. The surviving women and children carried the event beyond the battlefield, taken captive to Kafur and then Damascus. Their testimony became the living archive of what happened. Power could kill Husayn, but it did not control the memory of Husayn. Ashura therefore became more than a date. It became an accusation against tyranny, a wound inside Islamic history, and a permanent reminder that religious language can be used by power, even while power turned against the family of the Prophet himself. The Karbala remains one of the most devastating episodes in Islamic history, not because lives were lost, but because of whose lives were lost. The Prophet Muhammad's own grandson, betrayed, killed and slaughtered, Husayn ibn Ali, together with close members of the Prophet's household and loyal companions, was killed by forces of a coup ruled under Umayyad state during an internal Islamic Muslim conflict. It was a coup, it was a takeover. The tragedy shattered the expectation that kingship to the Prophet would protect his family from political violence. The horror did not end with the battlefield. The surviving women and children were taken captive and paraded through Kafur and Damascus. Their public testimony transformed Karbala from a local military encounter into a defining moral crisis remembered across generations. The atrocity exposed how political authority within religious groups can employ religious legitimacy while acting against those most closely associated with the founder, Muhammad, of the very faith. It demonstrated that power, when detached from moral restraint, can override family, covenant, mercy, and conscience. For many Muslims throughout history, Karbala has therefore stood as more than a historical defeat. It has become a permanent warning that no religious civilization is immune from internal corruption, and that injustice committed from within may leave deeper wounds than opposition from without. More than 13 centuries later, the names of the victors are largely remembered because of the crimes, while Husayn's name endures because of the stand he took and the defeat he suffered. Karbala continues to confront every generation with the same question: when political power and moral conviction collide, where should allegiance ultimately lie?